World Migratory Bird Day 2021. My name is Marianne. I'm coming to you from Houston Audubon's Raptor and Education Center. I've got Anna helping out behind the scenes as our co-host today. And Houston Audubon is excited to be celebrating World Migratory Bird Day as we do every year, bringing attention to the many challenges that migratory birds face and how we can improve the world for them right in our own backyards. Today, I am joined, right now I'm joined by Simon, who is a great horned owl that lives here at our Raptor Center and helps us educate about the wonders of birds and how important they are and why they matter so much, why we do what we do, why Houston Audubon is dedicated to bird conservation and does amazing work on the Upper Texas coast over the last 52 years. So today our focus obviously is on migratory birds, but not all birds migrate. And my program is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? And Simon or great horned owls are definitely one of those birds that prefer to stay around their home territories most of their lives. They do wander a little bit, but this is a bird that can be seen and heard year-round in our area and probably where you are too. They're found all across North America, actually all across the Western Hemisphere in a great variety of habitats, from urban settings to country, mountains, forest, you name it, you can probably find a great horned owl nearby. And here at our Raptor Center, we take care of many, many different raptors. You're going to meet a few more a little bit later that can no longer live in the wild. Simon was actually found along a highway in Wyoming where she had been hit by a car and sustained a broken leg and a broken wing. She was rehabbed at a great rehab center in Wyoming, in Cody, Wyoming. And unfortunately, her wing is a little bit crooked, so she doesn't fly well enough to go back to living in the wild. And obviously, if you're a flighted bird, you need to fly in order to survive, and especially if you're a migratory bird. So Simon resides here and helps us teach at schools and hospitals and libraries all across the greater Houston region, and of course worldwide through Zoom and on Facebook. And I invite all of you to come and visit us so you can meet Simon up close in the near future. So I'm going to put her down so I can operate the equipment. And feel free to ask questions in the chat. Anna will be helping me monitor the chat. And we love questions. We love talking about birds. So you're in good hands, hopefully. There's lots to talk about. And again, welcome to World Migratory Bird Day 2021. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see like that. The theme this year is sing, fly, and soar like a bird. The diversity of birds that migrate is truly amazing, and what they face every single day of their lives as they're migrating is equally astonishing. So let's take a peek into the life of migratory birds. First of all, I'm here in Houston with Houston Audubon, dedicated to bird conservation over the last 52 years. We're very fortunate to take care of some really important habitat on the Upper Texas coast. Many of you might be familiar with our coastal sanctuaries. I am here in Southeast Texas at the Raptor and Education Center. Our headquarters is in West Houston at the Edith L. Moore Nature Sanctuary. Stand by. And then we have some really cool sanctuaries to the north of us. 17 sanctuaries in all, over 4,000 acres protected. So if you're on the west side of Houston, the Edith L. Moore Nature Sanctuary is beautiful. 17.5 acres surrounding this historic log cabin that Edith Moore built in 1931, 1932. It's a wonderful habitat for migrants and birds year round. And it's really become almost an island. We refer to all of our locations as sanctuaries. as Houston has gotten larger and larger, this is an oasis amidst the urbanization and the growing city of Houston, Texas. So I hope all of you make some time to go and visit the Edith L. Moore Sanctuary and get out of the craziness of the city. Up north, not too many people know about our northern sanctuaries that are in a transition zone between the Gulf Coast Prairie, the Piney Woods, the Blackland Prairie, totally different from what we have here in the Houston area. Winters Bayou and Damath sanctuaries are just beautiful. So again, our website has directions and information on all of these. Of course, with migration, birds are crossing the Gulf of Mexico, so our coastal sanctuaries are incredibly important. On Galveston Island, we invite you to visit Dos Vacas Muertes Bird Sanctuary on the west end of Galveston. It's been getting lots of great birds stopping by after their Gulf journey in the last few weeks. And of course, the world famous High Island. We've been making lots of improvements to our High Island sanctuaries. We have 4 sanctuaries within the town of High Island, and people come from all over the world to see the birds and see the marvels of migration. And it's really a spectacular place to visit in the springtime in particular. So I hope all of you have had a chance to go and visit High Island this spring. And I am broadcasting from the log cabin right that you see in the picture from Houston Audubon's Raptor and Education Center in Southeast Houston. And we'd love for you guys to come by and see us sometime. So the name of my program, as I said, is Should I Stay or Should I Go? The Clash group coined that phrase in their song back in 1982, and it's forever a question stuck in my head from growing up in the 1980s. But we're going to talk today about why and how birds migrate. Oh, almost played the song. So when we think about birds migrating and the options of migrating or not migrating, sometimes in this picture, obviously, we see the penguins with their suitcase. It looks like, oh, you know, they really don't go anywhere, but they do migrate great distances. All kinds of birds across the planet Earth move throughout their life cycle. And for Texas, we are an incredibly important location. We're home to over 630 bird species, and 98.5% of all neotropical migrant species in North America pass through Texas. So that puts a lot of pressure on us. We are incredibly important for a multitude of reasons for all of these birds. Migration is the seasonal movement of animals from one region to another. And of course, in North America, we often see maps like this where the migration pathways are kind of divided into 4 main corridors or flyways: the Atlantic, the Central, the Mississippi in the blue, obviously along the Mississippi River, and the Pacific along the West Coast. But it's a lot more complicated than that. But remembering where Texas is, we get a lot of mixture from those other flyways. And migration isn't just isolated to North America or the Western Hemisphere. It's happening all across the planet Earth pretty much year round. So there's a couple different migration strategies. There's complete migration, where all individuals leave the breeding area after raising their families. These are birds that typically are nesting or breeding in the northern climates, and a lot of complete migrants are traveling incredible distances between their breeding and their non-breeding habitats. There are birds that make partial migrations, seasonal movement by some, but not all individuals from a breeding area, and there can be overlap of breeding and non-breeding. You know, we get a ton of red-tailed hawks here in the wintertime. We have red-tailed hawks that stay year-round. There's this, constant movement of birds. And this year we saw a lot of birds that are grouped under what we call eruptive migration. Many people experienced an influx of birds like pine siskins at their bird feeders this past winter. So These are migrants in particular that tend to be food specialists that are leaving the boreal forest, the northern forests, when food is scarce, and kind of descending in epic numbers to places where you don't normally see that many. And the number and the distance they travel can be very unpredictable, which is why we call it eruptive. So why do birds migrate? It's a strategy to take advantage of seasonally abundant food supplies, and also, as we'll see, to get to places where the resources are rich for raising your families. Weather, photoperiod are two of the big triggers for migration. Birds, of course, that are insectivorous, that are here in our area in the summertime, they all head south for the winter. So food supply is a big trigger and a reason why many birds migrate. And then, of course, nesting and breeding, going back to an area that will provide enough resources, not just for yourself, but for your growing family, is very important. So food scarcity at different times of the year will, of course, have birds migrating. There'll be less competition for nesting space if you're moving to a new area. Milder climates, longer daylights. Think about all the birds that travel to the far north, Canada, Alaska. They're enjoying, 3 months of sunshine in the summertime, raising their families. So how do birds migrate? Long ago, many people had all these varying theories about birds. There was the transfiguration group that believed that birds actually changed into different species at different seasons, different times of the year. There was another whole group of people that believed that birds actually buried themselves in the mud underneath ponds and would emerge again in the springtime. So a lot of confusion about what happened to birds that they saw regularly in the summertime when they disappeared. In 1822 in Germany, this stork appeared alive, and it had this spear through its neck. And this was a big turning point over in Europe in people's thoughts about bird migration. These storks, there were several of them that eventually were found, and they're now stuffed and on display at museums over in Germany. They, the people in Germany realized that these were spears from Africa, and this opened up the world of migration to scientists in the early 1800s. They started to realize that birds were actually moving. They weren't disappearing or changing into other types of birds. They were moving away in the winter and returning to their breeding grounds in the springtime. So this kind of bizarre, sad looking stork was a big turning point for our understanding of migration. There are many clues and cues that birds rely on for migration. There are metabolic changes that happen to a bird. Food consumption increases, fat accumulates, all kinds of hormone levels are changing. Externally, the day length is changing. Days are getting shorter, temperatures are getting cooler, weather is changing, flowering and foliation, the fall is coming. Plants are beginning to go into their dormancy. And of course, insects are hatching in the spring and then diminishing populations of insects in the fall. So there's all these cues and clues that birds are triggered by for migration. They are orienting themselves in many different ways, but our celestial bodies are important. The sun, the position of the sun in the sky, birds know by the position of the sun which direction they're heading. And of course, a lot of birds, to avoid more hazardous weather and predators, they'll fly at night, and the stars will help to guide them on their way, which is pretty incredible. So many of us are hooked to our phones and GPS navigation just to get around town, and these birds are making these epic journeys just by watching the stars and the position of the sun. So how do people study migration? Banding has been around for a very, very long time and still occurs regularly across the world. If you're over in Europe, they call it ringing. Radar has become a powerful tool for studying bird migration. Radio telemetry, computer chips are getting more and more sophisticated and smaller, so we can access migration information on smaller and smaller species, way more than we ever have before. There are scientists who do moon watching. You can see the birds moving across the face of a full moon. And of course, nowadays there are audio recordings that are being made on tall buildings that can identify the birds that are migrating after dark. So there's so much more technology that we can put to use nowadays than ever before. While I mentioned banding, John James Audubon was one of the first people to start banding experiments here in North America when he lived here in the early 1800s by putting little silver strings on eastern phoebes. Now, of course, we use these silver bands, lightweight aluminum bands that give each bird that's banded a unique identification number, sort of like a social security number. And the birds are not harmed when they're caught and then banded. All kinds of information can be taken on that bird before it's released back to the wild. And then the hope is that, somebody will find it many, many years later in a different location and report back to the bird banding lab. And then the scientists who originally banded the bird will get a lot of great information: how far that bird traveled, how long it lived. The percentage of birds that are found or recaught sometimes is very small, but every bird that is discovered with a band on it after being banded can give us some incredible information. One fun story concerns the chimney swift. Now, the chimney swift is a very tiny insectivorous bird that is here in North America for the summer. They make this cool twittering sound. They nest in chimneys. They have adapted to using man-made structures for many, many, many years. Their sticks are made out of saliva and their nests are made out of small saliva and sticks that they adhere to the inside wall of the chimney. They don't harm your chimney when they're nesting. Each chimney swift eats over 1,200 insects every single day. They only eat flying insects. And I have a chimney swift specimen I'll share with you right now. Bring it up to the camera. So this is how big they are. When they open their beak, their mouths are very wide. So they fly around all day with their beaks open, catching over 1,200 flying insects. I have 1,200 plastic flies in my jar here. That's a lot of bugs that this one bird can consume. So fly all day, catching bugs, and of course they come here to raise their families. This is a really interesting bird. This bird cannot perch on a branch like most birds can. It can't walk on the ground. Its feet are held way back on its body, and it has, hopefully you'll be able to see this, spikes on the ends of its tail feathers to help it prop up on a vertical surface. Well, back in the 20s, and 1930s, nobody really knew what happened to chimney swifts when they left our skies at the end of the summer. So the government created this big mission to find out, and about 500,000 chimney swifts were banded. People were trained all over the eastern U.S., and they would throw nets on the tops of chimneys and capture hundreds of them and put the little bands on their feet. And then it was just a waiting game until someone way down in South America, who was studying the indigenous tribes down in South America, met one of the tribal chiefs who was wearing a lot of jewelry, and some of the jewelry was made out of chimney swift bands. And the tribes in the Amazon would also use the chimney swift bird bands for trading amongst groups. So that's how we found out that chimney swifts winter all the way down in South America, which is, an epic journey for these little tiny birds. Incredibly beneficial, and unfortunately, a bird who's in decline in many parts of our country because people are capping their chimneys. Regular chimneys aren't being built anymore on housing, or there's flashing on the inside that the chimney swifts can't cling on to. So there are fewer and fewer places for these birds to nest. And luckily, you can put up your own chimney swift tower in your backyard, like in this picture. You'll also see chimney swift towers around town, at parks, at the zoo, here at our Raptor Center. We have a big initiative called Swifts Over Houston, where we monitor chimney swifts at various locations, schools, and churches. After the nesting season, the chimney swifts gather in larger groups and go into larger chimneys to rest at night. And so we have watch parties, Swift night outs towards the end of summer that y'all are invited to join us at. And it truly is a spectacle to see hundreds, sometimes thousands of swifts entering a chimney to rest for the night and then spreading out the next morning, kind of like smoke coming out of a chimney, to go off and consume all those insects. Really doing a great job for us. So this is an abundance map for the chimney swifts. You'll see as we get to March and April, they spread out across the eastern US up into southern Canada. And then as soon as November rolls around, they've all retreated down into South America. And if you've got swifts in your chimney or you see them around your town, you can let us know by visiting our Facebook page called Swifts Over Houston, and just tell us what you're seeing. We work really hard to preserve chimneys where we know that swifts have been swifts have been using for a very, very long time. So we hope you join us on some of our swift counts. A very similar bird, another aerial insectivore, is the purple martin. Purple martins are here for the summer. East of the Rocky Mountains, purple martins completely rely on man-made housing. They're the birds that nest in the apartment style birdhouses that you see on long poles in people's yards and at nature centers, natural areas around the region. And they come here for the summer hunting butterflies, dragonflies, all kinds of flying insects, raising their families. And just like the chimney swifts, they retreat down to South America for the winter. And this is another bird that we're concerned about because there are fewer and fewer people who are taking up the call and having purple martin houses and maintaining them, making them available for these birds. We can see an amazing gathering of purple martins every year in the Houston area. Down in Stafford, it used to be up by Willowbrook Mall, but now it seems to be focused down in the Stafford area. Just like chimney swifts, at the end of the nesting season, these birds start to gather. And there are so many of them that gather in one location that in the morning when they're lifting off, they actually show up on weather radar as these donut rings. And you can track them by looking at weather radar early in the morning as these birds are getting ready to lift off and go hunt insects for the rest of the day. And you can also visit these known roost sites like the one in Stafford. We have purple martin watch parties, and you can see half a million purple martins coming into the small trees in this shopping center. It is an amazing spectacle that we get to enjoy here at the end of summer. And you can go to our website to see when those dates are. And again, here's from Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the abundance map. You see that as spring hits, these birds will spread out across the eastern US and then retreat as the winter nears and the food supply of flying insects obviously diminishes. Well, here at our center, even though we're focused on raptors, you can also meet Emilio, who I'll get out. Emilio is a purple martin, a male purple martin. They're the ones that get all the beautiful purple colors, purplish black feathers. And he's about 4 years old now. And I mentioned in the beginning of the program that there are many dangers that migratory birds face. And colliding with glass windows on buildings is one of the big obstacles for many birds. And Emilio, unfortunately, he was at one of those gatherings, and we don't know if he was being chased or a group of them were being chased by a predator, maybe a hawk or an owl, but something startled the group, and as they flew off, sadly, Emilio hit a glass window on a business and sustained a really bad trauma, really bad brain trauma, and he can't see anymore. His optic nerves were damaged, so he lives here, and we take good care of him. And he is our ambassador for Purple Martins and encouraging folks to install Purple Martin houses, come out to our watch parties, be mindful of Purple Martins in your region. Of course, as insectivores, aerial insectivores, they are at risk from pesticides, the use of pesticides, and making that epic journey back and forth to South America every year. They face a lot of dangers. Imagine traveling all the way from South America and your housing is gone, or you're hitting some really crazy winter weather like we experienced here in Houston in February. A lot of martins perished in the freeze because we weren't just the only ones experiencing that really deep cold temperatures, but people to the north of us, blizzards and cold temperatures. Purple martins are one of the first birds to migrate back. Some of them arrive back in Louisiana and Texas like in January. So when we have some really crazy weather, these birds can be at great peril because their food supply obviously is gone and those freezing temperatures. So sadly, a lot of purple martins did not survive that freeze we had. So there's, natural and man-made problems that these birds are facing on a day-to-day basis. So let's go back to the program. Oops. It's so fun to see and hear the purple martins up in the skies around town in the summertime. So I mentioned that computer technology is really helping the scientists learn more and more about bird migration, and the computer chips are getting smaller and smaller. So small songbirds like a painted bunting can be tracked and monitored on its migration. A lot of migration studies have happened with larger birds, especially shorebirds like long-billed curlews that are hooked up with transmitters. And some of these birds really make tremendous journeys back and forth from the northern areas down to our Gulf Coast region every single year. And this really helps us to understand the importance of stopover habitat all along the route. The wildlife refuge system was started many, many years ago to support migratory waterfowl as they moved up and down the northern hemisphere, parts of North America. And now we're realizing these stopovers are important for a multitude of species. And like I said, the computer technology has really enabled the study of many, many more species, particularly shorebirds like red knots that make an epic journey back and forth every year. And scientists are learning that they don't necessarily take the same path back and forth every year. This is red knot 6J3, spring of 2012, heading due north from the Gulf Coast region all the way up to Alaska. Now its fall migration and route is very different down to South America. It's a tremendous journey. And then shooting back up again across the Pacific in the spring of 2013. That's, that was a nonstop flight, 6+ days. It's pretty incredible what these birds are able to do. Here's another example of a bird on the East Coast making an impressive journey. So these little transmitters that give scientists update nowadays in real time are really expanding our knowledge of migration and what these birds need along the way. So how do we study migration? There's ways that we can help that aren't very difficult. The Christmas bird count, of course, was started in 1900. It was tradition on Christmas Day to go out and shoot birds, and whoever could bag and shoot the most won the award for the day. That all changed in 1900. And obviously, as you can see from the chart, more and more people now participate. We have wonderful Christmas bird counts around the Houston area, but no matter where you are, there is a Christmas bird count happening in your region. And we always need new volunteers and new helpers. You don't have to be a bird expert. Um, it's a great way to start learning about the parks in your area and what birds are out there, and all of the information, all of those birds that are logged on all these Christmas bird counts, and now, and even, you know, day to day when we're birding, go into eBird, run by Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and the day-to-day observations, and then these big counts like a Christmas bird count, are really helping to quickly catapult the knowledge that the scientists have of birds in an incredible way. People often ask, how fast do birds fly? They fly pretty efficiently depending on the type of bird that they are. As you can see, from a tiny Blackpole Warbler at 15 to 23 miles an hour to a loon 28 to 50 miles per hour. Migrants using powered flight regularly cross stretches of open water like the Gulf of Mexico, which can be 500 to 600 miles. You know, for a little hummingbird, it might take that hummingbird 18 plus up to 24 hours to cross, especially if they're hitting some north winds, which is why our stopovers are so important. You know, some birds are up in the air for a stretch of time that could be 70 to 80 hours without stopping. And so wherever they are arriving, their first rest stop is critical. I often say we're like the Buc-ee's for the birds here on the upper Texas coast. Whoops, so my slide got messed over, but I'm supposed to say the overwater migration, over the Gulf water migration, is probably the biggest of any migration on the planet. 1 billion birds, 20 to 30 hours nonstop across the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty amazing. We talked about the 4 different flyways, but again, birds don't naturally just stick to these flyways, but this kind of helps guide decision making, and we know that many birds do stick to the flyways and are very homed in to familiar rest stops along the way. So how far do some of these birds travel? Here's that red knot again, from Argentina to Brazil to the Delaware Bay, all the way up to the Arctic. And many of you know that the red knot needs the eggs of the horseshoe crabs when they hit the Delaware Bay. So these rest stops that these birds are making are critically important to their survival. Here's another example of the Blackpole Warbler wintering in South America, flying 2,500 to 5,000 miles one way back up to the Canadian provinces, to its northern breeding grounds. This is a tiny bird making an epic migration. And of course, we all love hummingbirds, wintering in Central America, Mexico, many of them flying all the way up to Canada, making that 500-mile nonstop journey across the Gulf. And they can't read the newspapers about incoming storms coming from the north. We had a lot of storms, cold weather coming down from the north and west this year, which stalled a lot of birds on the upper Texas coast, which for bird watchers, you know, many of them were able to see some spectacular fallouts and great diversity of species. But it certainly puts a lot of birds at risk for exhaustion and not making it on their full migration. Here's an example of a familiar duck that we love to see here in the wintertime, the blue-winged teal. Again, stopping here on its migration, winters in South America and breeds in the northern plains. 7,000 miles one way, many of these birds will go. Fat is the fuel for migration. Many species need to double or even triple their body fat so that they can survive migration. So before they migrate, a shorebird will typically be about 66% body fat, a songbird about 70%, a hawk about 15%. So again, pre-migration for a shorebird, 66%. When they reach that important stopover at Delaware Bay, they have lost a great percentage of their body fat, down to 3%. So they need resources at the stopovers in order to survive. These refueling stations are critical, just like we refuel at Buc-ee's. So to compare, a 175-pound man who wants to gain 60% in 2 weeks would have to eat 46 Big Macs per day for 14 days. I don't know anybody who wants to do that, but these birds are doing it twice a year, which is incredible. And like I said, many birds rely on the same refueling stations year after year after year. So they home in on those places that they know where they can find the fresh water, food, shelter, resting spaces. And now, thanks to, again, better technology, we can make use of weather radar, and you can sign up for reports and alerts from birdcast. So it's like a weather forecast, but it's a birdcast. And scientists from Cornell and around the world can accurately predict what birds are moving, what species are moving, using all kinds of technology, and give an alert to what birds are moving through a particular area at any particular time. And that can help us make good decisions about turning off lights in downtown areas. It's really a tremendous help. There are many challenges to migration, just the physical stress that they're going through, weather events we talked about, and then of course a lot of human-related threats from climate change, cats, and other non-natural predators, window collisions like we saw with the purple martin, light pollution, herbicides and pesticides, and of course habitat loss and fragmentation of habitat. So I have a couple more raptors to introduce to you that are long distance migrants. Many of you in the Houston area might have noticed over the last 10 years an increase in the number of Mississippi kites in our area. Mississippi kites winter in South America and are here in the southern US for the summertime, where they nest in city parks and golf courses, places where there's water and small groups of trees. They nest up in the trees. And after Hurricane Ike, there was a lot more laws about new construction and flood and rainwater detention. And so there's a lot more man-made water detention ponds and retention ponds in the area. And I think that has greatly increased the resources for Mississippi kites. And they're now found nesting in neighborhoods in our area because they rely heavily on dragonflies, cicadas, grasshoppers, tree frogs. Those kinds of prey items make up the bulk of their diet. And those kinds of prey items are found near water. I often call Mississippi kites distracted drivers because just like texting and driving, these birds can eat and fly at the same time. Not too many birds can do that. And that's possibly how my next bird that I'm going to introduce to you got injured. And before I bring her out, you can watch this abundance map of the Mississippi kite. Again, springtime, late March, April, getting up into the Gulf Coast regions, and then by the fall, disappearing. So let me get my next bird. Her name is Skeeter, and she is a Mississippi kite. She's now 9 years old, and she was found on her first migration down to South America. And I often ask kids when I'm doing programs, you know, what do you think you were doing when you were 3 months old? You weren't solo flying to South America, but that's what this bird was doing. And unlike a lot of the colorful songbirds, the raptors fly around the Gulf of Mexico. They call that Circum Gulf migration. They want to make use of the updrafts and the thermals. You don't get very many thermals over the open water. They ride the thermals, the pockets of warm air. It saves them a lot of energy, gives them a good lookout. And so they stick to the land. I'm giving her some fun snacks while she's out. And so the coastal areas are a great place to go hawk watching. And of course, we have Smith Point Hawk Watch that opens up in late August through November, which is our local hawk watch to visit on the east side of Galveston Bay. And it's a place where you can really watch the spectacle of migration close up. So Skeeter here was on her first migration, and she made it to Corpus Christi, where she was found alongside of a road with an injured shoulder. We don't know if she hit a power line or maybe was hit by a car. Maybe she was distracted and eating while she was flying. She was rescued and sent to the Bird Rescue Center down in Corpus. They x-rayed her, bandaged her all up, and she spent the winter at the rehab center healing, and her wing healed really well, but it's crooked. So unfortunately, she can't fly well enough to go back to living in the wild. So she resides here and helps us teach about the perils of migration and how amazing some of the birds are that we have here in our center. And she's very excited about having some superworms today for a snack. Mississippi kites are gorgeous birds, all gray with black wingtips and black tails and this kind of whitish spot there on their wings. Built for flight. Kites can spend enormous amounts of time up in the sky, soaring, steering with their tail, using their tail like a rudder, catching their prey while they're flying. They just swoop out of the sky and catch a lizard on a leaf or catch a dragonfly out of the air. I was actually at a park one time, and I thought a hummingbird had zipped out of a bush, and right over my head a Mississippi kite came along and snagged it, and I actually heard it get hit, but it ended up being a cicada because I took pictures of the kite, and when I was able to zoom in, I saw that that particular kite had just caught a cicada. They do love cicadas, but they spend so much time in the air. They're just built for flying. The toy kite that you fly at a park was named after these birds. There are many different species of kites on the upper Texas coast. The Mississippi kites are the more commonly seen here, of course, in the summertime, and they retreat down to South America for the winter. So come and visit Skeeter sometime here at the Raptor Center. I'll be right back. So kites are very social raptors, and Skeeter, the Mississippi kite, gets to reside with another kite that we're going to talk about next. That's the swallowtail kite. Swallowtail kites are one of the most beautiful raptors we have in our area, but again, they're only here for the summer. They too make that amazing migration down to South America. They're of course called swallow-tailed kites because of their deeply forked tail like a barn swallow. They're white and black, so you really can't mistake them. We don't have a whole lot of them right in the heart of Houston, but Liberty County is a great place to see swallowtail kites. And you can find the bulk of their population in places like Florida. They make this spectacular migration back and forth every year. The birds that are in Florida will actually hopscotch along the Caribbean, over Cuba, over to the Yucatan. Again, they don't like to go over big expanses of open water. Only here for the summer and then retreating again in the wintertime. So these maps, anytime you're logging a bird that you're seeing, it really helps the scientists understand the movements of birds and what they need in order to survive. So before we move on to a couple fun facts, I'll introduce you to another kite. All right. This is Luna. Luna is a swallow-tailed kite, and I mentioned that she resides here with Skeeter, the Mississippi kite. Kites, like I said, are very social, and you'll often find swallowtail kites nesting in kind of loose colonies with Mississippi kites, you know, in nearby trees. They like similar habitats with water, again, because they love those tree frogs and cicadas, grasshoppers, lots of dragonflies. They build their nests at the tippy tops of trees out of Spanish moss. So their nests can be very well camouflaged, but they do face some other perils. And Luna here, she was found as a very, very tiny nestling. We don't know if it was a storm that maybe knocked her from the nest or potentially a predator. They're at risk from predators like great horned owls attacking the nest after dark because their nests are kind of exposed up at the tops of trees. But she was found on the ground. They weren't able to get her back into the nest. So she was raised at one of our local rehab centers. We're very fortunate here in the Houston area to have several rehabilitation centers nearby that care for injured wildlife of all kinds. And so she ended up growing up by herself at one of the rescue centers. They didn't have any other kites for her to be with. So she doesn't really know that she's a kite, and she's kind of clumsy. She wouldn't survive very, very long out in the wild. She prefers to stay. You know, if she had the option, should I stay or should I go? She'd prefer to stay. She gets along really well with Skeeter. And this is, like I said, a bird that we don't get to see, you know, really nesting here in the Houston area, but around more in the outside of the big city, in the more rural areas, you can see these birds. Any drive up Highway 90 towards Liberty County, towards Dayton, always be on the lookout for the swallowtail kites. You can't mistake them with that deeply forked tail and that white and black pattern to their feathers. So I'll be right back. All right, so let's look at a couple fun facts before we close it out today about migration. Of course, there are many famous birds, but the Arctic tern flies from the Arctic to Antarctic and back, and back a total of 25,000 miles for the round trip. So in its lifetime, individuals might fly between 1.5 million miles, equivalent to 60 trips around the Earth or 3 trips to the moon, which is pretty impressive. The Blackpole Warbler can take up to 80 to 90 hours nonstop over the Atlantic to reach South America. That's equivalent to a human running a 4-minute mile nonstop for 80 hours. So you can imagine how efficient these birds are. If you compare a little tiny warbler to a car, these guys are getting about 175,000 miles to the gallon. That's some incredible fuel efficiency. There are birds that fly and migrate at incredible altitudes, like bar-headed geese flying over the Himalayan mountains as high as 28,000 feet. And when you think about that, you know, you have to realize how little oxygen there is up there. There is when you go up that high. Birds have an incredible respiratory system that enables them to fly at high altitudes. Our respiratory system takes up about 5% of our body's volume. For a bird, it's 20%. They have 2 lungs like we do, but they have a system of air sacs in their hollow bones. You can see this bone is hollow. Hopefully you can see that okay on the camera. So birds have hollow bones. Their bones are super strong, but they have hollow pockets in them to keep the birds lightweight so they can fly. And in many of these larger hollow spaces are air sacs that are connected to the bird's lungs. And from the time a bird hatches out of its egg, it starts breathing air, its lungs are never empty. It has a constant supply of fresh air from its air sacs on each in and out breath. So unlike us, when we breathe out, our lungs are empty. Birds have a constant source of fresh air because of this system of air sacs. That enables them to fly at really high altitudes. They have really a lot of red blood cells, and all that fresh oxygen is very, very important when they're flying. so high up in the sky. Birds are pretty incredible. So what can we do? Good bird habitats provide food, water, shelter, space, and safety. Since 1970, scientists estimate that 2.9 billion birds have disappeared. 1 in 4 birds have been gone now since 1970. And in terms of migration, here are a couple of examples from my friend at Texas Parks and Wildlife. So 2 in 5 Baltimore Orioles have been lost since 1970. 28% population loss in migratory bird species since 1970. Aerial insectivores, 32% population loss since 1970. Grassland birds hit even harder at 53% population loss. That's significant. There are some simple things we can do. Native plants, making windows safe, doing citizen science, keeping cats indoors, reducing use of plastic, avoiding pesticides. Think about drinking shade-grown coffee that benefits the birds on the plantations. As our urban areas increase and spread out, birds that are habitat specialists will tend to disappear. And we end up seeing a lot more of the same few species in heavily urban areas. Native plants will provide food, home, and habitat for the insects that so many of our migratory birds rely on. Insects are chemically aligned with our native plants here in North America. And for instance, an oak tree can potentially provide home and habitat to 400 to 500 different species of insects, a native oak to North America. Whereas like a crepe myrtle that originated in the Mediterranean may only host, 3 species of insects. The birds that arrive back in the spring and summer heavily rely on insects to raise their young. We love to see the chickadees at our bird feeders eating sunflower seed, but they switch. They are making, they're using caterpillars and insects to raise their young. And for just a single chickadee family, chickadees are tiny, it might take upwards of 9,000 caterpillars to raise their one family in a few short weeks. So native plants providing the home for the insects, providing nectar, of course, for nectar eating birds like hummingbirds. We can supplement with hummingbird feeders, keeping them clean and in safe areas for these birds. Planting native plants that will provide seeds at the right time of year for our local birds, our resident birds, and our migrants. Fresh water is incredibly important. That's one of the reasons why High Island is such a popular destination for the birds that have just crossed the salt waters of the Gulf. They need fresh water, and all of the drips and water features at our sanctuaries provide just that for these birds. Birds need a shelter from storms and safe nest sites to raise their young and the resources to build their nests. So again, having a home backyard or yard that provides all of this is very important. And we can supplement with housing for our resident birds and non-migrants, and for some of the migratory birds also. So we encourage you guys to get out there, young and old, and everybody in between, using the great technology of eBird, iNaturalist to log what birds you're seeing. We have a wonderful resource on our website at HoustonAudubon.org and Bird Friendly Houston to give you information on plants to plant in your yard. We have a natives nursery at our headquarters, Edith L. Moore Nature Sanctuary. And we love answering questions by email or if you stop by to help you transform your yard into a more bird-friendly yard. Get out there and do some bird watching today. The migrants are still coming through, heading north. And we really appreciate you guys taking the time to be with us. And thank you, Anna. You want to add some more comments, Anna? And I know we have some other things going on today.
Yeah, so today's not only World Migratory Bird Day, it's also Global Big Day. So if you want to get outside and submit some eBird checklists, that would be amazing. I also wanted to say we had at least one question in the Facebook group, and it's about the bones that you showed, Marianne, and she asked, do birds have bone marrow?
No, their bones are hollow, as you can see. Our bones are filled with marrow and much heavier.
Awesome. And let me just make sure if anybody has any other questions. Let's see. We did have somebody ask about cats, and the impact of cats. So I answered that on Facebook, but go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, did you answer it?
I typed it in, but if we wanted to.
Yeah, cats are a very significant threat to birds, particularly feral cat populations. Not just birds, but many species of native wildlife. Keeping your cat indoors will extend the life of your cat, make it healthier and happier. Catios are really popular, which give cats a space to go outside but not harm anything in the environment. But there's more and more research being done. They're actually putting monitors on cats so they can track them and see just how much damage they can do to local bird populations, and it's significant. It's in, I don't know, the billions of birds every year. So keep your cat inside.
Keep it inside. Awesome. That was all the questions we had from Facebook. I guess thank you everybody for tuning in, and go enjoy your World Migratory Bird Day. Thank you, Marianne. This was great.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.